All right, ready to get philosophical? Today we're taking a deep dive into contractarianism.
A theory, you might say, that's all about agreements, about justice, and about how we can even begin to think about how to build a moral society.
And listeners, I think it's safe to say you're already familiar with the idea of a social contract.
Right, that agreement where we sort of, conceptually at least, agree to give up certain freedoms.
In exchange for the benefits of cooperation.
Exactly.
But today we're going way beyond just the basics. We're not going to spend all day on Hobbes and Locke.
No, we're going to assume you already know them pretty well.
We're going to really dissect contractarianism.
We're going to get into those little nuances that really make you think.
Yeah, all those details. And we've got some great sources lined up, some that delve into all the different, I guess you could say, flavors of the theory.
Hobbesian, of course.
Kantian.
Even some more modern takes, like Gauthier's morals by agreement.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So buckle up, everybody, because we're about to go deep.
So, first things first. When we talk about this contract,
Yeah.
is this like a literal thing?
Right. Like, is this an actual historical event?
Or is it more of a thought experiment?
A way to understand the ideas behind justice?
Exactly, because I'm thinking, if it's supposed to be a real historical event.
Where's the evidence?
Exactly. And if it's just a thought experiment.
Then how much weight does it really hold in the actual world?
Right. How much can it really tell us about how things work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question.
It is. It is a big question. A lot of philosophers argue that it's hypothetical.
Okay.
A kind of scenario to help us figure out how we should act.
Morally, you mean?
Morally, yeah. It's like almost like a philosophical tool.
Oh, I like that. A tool.
Yeah, for kind of dissecting the concepts of, well, fairness and obligation, all that good stuff.
That makes a lot of sense to me, actually. So it's less about a literal contract.
Right.
And more about analyzing the logic.
Yeah.
Behind our moral intuitions. Like, why do we think it's important to keep a promise?
Yes. Or why do we feel like other people have certain rights that need to be respected?
Exactly. Okay, that's cool.
It is cool. But then there's another thing we need to consider.
Oh, what's that?
The contractors themselves.
Oh, okay.
See, contractarianism often starts with this assumption that people are rational and self-interested.
Oh, so are we talking about, like, what motivates people?
We are. Is it all just about what's best for ourselves?
Right. Or are we capable of being truly altruistic?
Because, if morality just boils down to self-interest.
How do we ever build a society that's truly moral?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's where this whole debate gets, really heated.
Totally.
Hobbes, for example, he had a pretty bleak view of human nature.
Oh, yeah, he did.
He believed that if there were no rules, no society.
Just the state of nature.
Right. It would be brutal, just a war of all against all.
And that's why he thought we needed a strong ruler.
Someone to force people to stick to that social contract.
To keep everything from descending into chaos.
Exactly.
But then you have someone like Locke, who believed in natural rights. That we have inherent rights.
To life, liberty, and property.
Right. And those exist whether or not there's a government.
So how does that fit into this whole contractarian idea?
Right. It seems like a totally different way of thinking about things.
Well, for Locke, the social contract isn't about giving up those rights completely.
Okay.
It's more about figuring out how to protect them better. So individuals, they agree to a government.
But not to escape some horrible state of nature.
Not exactly. It's more about safeguarding those freedoms they already have.
So it's less about just survival.
Right.
And more about, like, flourishing.
Yeah.
Creating a system where people can actually thrive.
And pursue their goals.
Without stepping on other people's rights.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's where the idea of justice comes in.
It does. For contractarians, a just society is one that upholds the terms of that agreement.
The social contract.
Right. So it has to be fair.
And benefit everyone who's a part of it.
Exactly. But, this whole idea of a just society based on, on a contract.
Yeah.
It brings up some really tricky questions. Like, what about the people who, who can't really consent to it?
Oh, right.
Or who don't have any real power to negotiate the terms?
You're totally right. That's actually one of the biggest criticisms of contractarianism.
It is. It is.
That it can end up excluding certain groups of people, marginalizing them even.
Yeah. Like, think about people with really severe disabilities.
Oh, yeah.
Or children.
Yeah.
Or even, non-human animals.
Right. Can they really be considered part of this contract?
Can they? That's where things get super complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, some contractarians try to address this
Okay. How?
by saying we should think about participation in a broader sense. So, for example, maybe we can include these groups indirectly.
Indirectly.
Right, like based on our long-term interests.
Oh, okay. I see.
Or based on what we understand about, societal well-being as a whole.
So it's not necessarily about getting literal agreement from every single individual.
No, not necessarily.
It's more about understanding that a just society considers the needs of everyone.
Yes, all of its members, even the ones who can't, actually speak for themselves.
Oh, okay. I see. So it's about recognizing the moral significance of everyone.
Of everyone, even if
Right.
they don't fit that traditional idea of a rational contractor.
Right.
And actually, some philosophers have taken this even further.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they've started to apply this idea of a contract to, future generations.
Wow.
Or even entire ecosystems.
That's amazing. So we're talking about more than just individual rights and obligations now.
We're thinking about environmental ethics.
Whoa.
Intergenerational justice, even.
That's really interesting. So even if we broaden this idea of the contract, it seems like there's still kind of a rosy picture of human nature, right? I mean, we keep talking about rationality and self-interest.
Right.
But what about all those other emotions that people have?
Oh, yeah.
Compassion, empathy, even resentment.
Yeah. Do those fit in here?
Do they have a place in contractarian thought?
That's a really good point. And it's true, traditional contractarianism can seem kind of,
Cold.
cold, calculating, it's all about logic.
It's just pure self-interest.
Right. But these days, a lot of contractarians say that actually emotions do matter.
Okay.
They say emotions shape our moral choices. Even if, maybe those seemingly altruistic things we do,
Yeah.
maybe they can be traced back to some kind of self-interest.
Oh, so we do nice things because it makes us feel good.
Yeah. Or maybe we want people to like us. Or to approve of us.
Right. Okay. So it's not that emotions are irrelevant.
Not at all.
It's more that we view them through this lens of ultimately serving ourselves in some way.
Yeah, that's one way to think about it. But of course, some people think that's too simplistic.
They'd say, hey, we got to give humans a little more credit than that.
Okay.
That our motivations are way more complex.
Right.
That it's all this interplay of reason, emotion.
Yeah. Right.
Even how we were raised, how society shapes us.
It's like we're getting into the really deep stuff now about the nature of morality itself.
We are. And what drives our actions. And this is where things get really, really interesting.
Right.
Because if we move past this idea that it's all about self-interest,
Yeah.
then contractarianism opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, well, how about subversive contractarianism?
Subversive.
Yeah. It's this approach that uses the idea of a social contract
Okay.
to critique the power structures we already have, to
Interesting.
point out the injustices.
Okay, but how does that... It seems kind of counterintuitive, right? To use a theory that's all about agreement
Yeah.
to analyze systems that are based on oppression.
That's exactly the point.
No. These subversive contractarians,
Yeah.
people like Carol Pateman and Charles Mills, they
Right.
say, look, a lot of our social systems, our political systems, they're built on these unspoken contracts.
Unspoken.
Right. Contracts that benefit some groups
Okay.
at the expense of others.
So these aren't literally written down, right?
No. They're more like,
Just the way things are.
unspoken agreements, social norms. But they keep these power dynamics in place. They keep the hierarchies going.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it.
So, for example, there's Pateman's idea of the sexual contract.
Sexual contract.
Yeah, she argues that there's this kind of historical ongoing agreement
Okay.
that gives men all the power and subordinates women.
Oh, wow.
And it shakes everything, family structures,
Right.
the economy, everything.
So by using this language of contractarianism,
Yes.
they're trying to expose these hidden power dynamics.
Exactly. They're saying, hey, this isn't some natural order of things. This is based on agreements. Right.
That are deeply unfair.
That's pretty radical.
It is. It's like they're flipping contractarianism on its head.
Right.
Not using it to justify the status quo, but
To critique it.
to critique it. And I think that's why contractarianism is still so fascinating to talk about.
It really is.
It gets us thinking about the foundations of our moral lives,
Yeah.
our political lives, and it makes us ask some really hard questions about how we want to organize our societies.
So, okay, we've been talking about this idea of a social contract, like what it even means.
Right.
Who's included.
And who might be left out.
Yeah, and even how it can be used to, critique systems of power.
All that stuff.
But I guess I'm wondering, like, how does this all connect to the real world? What can we actually do with these ideas?
That's where we can start to think about how these big philosophical ideas actually play out in our political systems.
Okay.
Think back to what we were saying about Hobbes and Locke.
Okay.
They both used this idea of the social contract, right, to explain why governments exist in the first place.
Exactly. But they each had, well, pretty different visions of what that government should actually look like.
Right. Hobbes, he was all about order, like even if it meant giving up some freedom.
Right, having that strong sovereign to keep everyone in line.
Whereas Locke, he was more about protecting individual rights.
He thought that citizens have a right to stand up to tyranny, to resist.
Exactly. And it's so interesting how those different ideas, they still shape how we think about politics today.
They do, absolutely.
Like even just think about things like, I don't know.
Surveillance.
Yeah, or national security, freedom of speech even.
All of that.
Contractarianism gives us this framework, this way to think about the balance between security and liberty.
It's like that classic question, would you be willing to give up some privacy if it meant being safer from terrorism?
Right. It forces us to really confront these tough choices.
Yeah.
And I guess to try to figure out what principles we're actually using to make those decisions.
Exactly. And it also makes us think about the kind of society we want to build, right?
Yeah.
Are we all about individual freedom, no matter what?
Or do we think it's important to, work together?
Yeah.
Act for the common good?
Even if that means putting some limits on what we can do as individuals.
Right.
It's a big question.
It really is. So, okay, it sounds like contractarianism isn't just some abstract idea that philosophers debate, right?
Oh, not at all.
It actually matters for how we think about governing ourselves,
Absolutely.
about our rights, and how we balance them with the needs of the community.
It's about the very foundation of our political systems.
That's amazing.
It is.
So as we kind of wrap things up here, we've covered a lot. Right?
We have, from the basic idea of the social contract.
All the complexities.
The critiques.
Yeah. But I guess I'm still left with this one big question. Like, if morality really is based on these agreements, how do we make sure those agreements are actually just, that they include everyone?
That's the question, isn't it? And philosophers, well, they've been trying to answer that for a long, long time.
Yeah.
But, I think contractarianism at least gives us a place to start, a way to think about what justice means and what it takes to create a moral society.
That's true. Just a lot to think about.
It does. It does. But, in the end, it's up to us, all of us, as individuals and as a society, to keep asking these questions, to refine our ideas about this contract, to try to build a world that's truly fair.
Right.
And just for everyone.
That's a really powerful thought to end on. So, listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive into contractarianism, we want to leave you with this challenge.
Keep thinking about the principles we've been talking about.
Question the assumptions that people make.
Challenge the inequalities you see in the world.
And work towards creating agreements that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
It's on all of us.
Thanks for joining us.